or like can we call you Jim or Jim James, Jimmy? I mean,
No, whatever. Yeah, yeah.
that's not gonna be an
Most
issue.
people call me and know me as Fergie, but it's fine. If you want to do Jim, James, Jimbo, whatever, I don't care.
Jimbo, okay, not
Whatever you want to shoot at me, you go for it. Yeah.
okay, but not Mr. Chambers. Man. That's kind of awkward.
Yeah, yeah, please. Yeah.
That's my father's name. All right, we're joined today by Jimbo. No, by Fergie Chambers, who is going to share with us some of his recent experiences. But before we get into that, I noticed you're wearing a Manos de Piedra shirt, Roberto Duran. So what's tell our audience about Roberto Duran and why you're wearing a Roberto Duran shirt.
Man, it actually it just I just dug it up. Well, I'm wearing a Roberto Duran shirt because generally, especially during this lockdown, at any given moment, I'm wearing a shirt with a boxer on it.
Okay.
Because if I'm not thinking about, I'm basically thinking about music, politics, plants, or boxing at all times.
Yeah. All right.
I was just training before this, but you know, Roberto Duran is one of the all-time greats from Panama in the sport, and you know, he was a hard hitter. He's Mike Tyson's favorite fighter. You know, not a lot of people knew that. But yeah, I was just going through my shirts and found this beautiful popping red here, you know,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
the hands of stone. I've been watching the way that I think every day when I take a shower or a bath at the end of the day, I watch a classic fight since this lockdown has started.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I was watching the two Duran Leonard fights, which, you know, the second one is the famous No Mas.
Right.
Um, but the first, you know, I mean, the first fight between them is one of the best fights you'll ever see.
It really is.
Um, and he is. I mean, he's just a beast. He's just a
Yeah.
beast. I really like to watch him fight because that, you know, I think for me too. You know, I box a little bit. I don't have a lot of reach. I'm not I'm not like a tall lanky guy. So those guys who have that kind of aggressive get inside and be a pit bull and hit you with inside shots as hard as
Yeah.
you can, that always appeals to me because that's basically how I have to fight. You know,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So
Anyway.
I think the first two Leonard Duran fights, those were actually interestingly, they're both kind of master classes in psychology, um, turning out in opposite directions. I mean, like, the first time, Duran definitely had a mental edge on Leonard by, provoking him and making him want to prove, how tough he was. And the second time around, Leonard definitely got the mental thing on Duran in a
Yep.
much more fashion. Yeah.
Yep. No, I mean, just danced around. Well, he did what you would have expected him to do in the first one. And then it was funny because a couple nights ago I was watching De La Hoya Trinidad
Mm-hmm.
um, with Sugar Ray Leonard commentating.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And they actually, you know, they compare it to that. But they compare it to the first fight, basically saying, I'm sorry. De La Hoya Trinidad was a different fight I watched. I was watching. It was this was Taylor Chavez, where Leonard was on the team, and
Oh,
comparing
yeah.
to that and saying that Meldrick Taylor, of course, the end of the Chavez Taylor fight completely changes the whole fucking thing in the last 5 seconds. But up before that, he's basically saying that Meldrick Taylor showed up to that fight the way he should have showed up the first time he saw Duran. You
Yeah. Yeah.
know, he was the younger, sort of, you know, snappier one, and he came in and like did his thing. You know, as opposed to, you know, what Leonard did, trying to sit there and thump with Duran, which, like, you don't thump with Duran, you know.
No. The interesting thing about that, though, is that inside fighting, or Duran, or even Duran's Panamanian, but a lot of that style of inside fighting, pressure fighting, is associated kind of like Mexican fighters, oftentimes to Mexican style, etc. But it's treated in an interesting way, in a very similar fashion to like this idea of unskilled labor. But the
Mm.
fact of the matter is that inside fighting actually requires a great deal of intelligence.
Oh my God.
Duran, on the inside, was actually a much smarter fighter than Leonard. I mean, like, Duran's probably the best inside fighter of all time.
Yep.
Now Leonard at mid range probably better than Duran. He had a longer reach too, but like, they each had advantages over each other. But on the inside, Duran was. I mean, inside fighting requires a lot of intelligence.
An incredible amount, you know, because they always, you know, if you're boxing, you know, the way they like to, you know, if you're staying outside and you're dancing around and keeping distance and playing with range, you actually have more time to really think about each move you're making and each reaction that's coming into it because of the distance that's there. When you're inside, like, you have to think and react, and you have to still throw combinations, and you have to be like evasive and keep your eyes open while you do it, and the reaction time is so much faster and it's so much more intense, and you can't breathe as well, and your peripheral vision is fucked. Like, it's actually, once you get to a point where if you're not just inside and you're just throwing shit wildly, and there's some rhyme or reason to what you're doing inside, I think it's way more of like an intellectual exercise than boxing. As the commentator, it's always like who's banging, who's boxing.
Right, 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 right.
Uh, but no, no, for sure, and I've been like trying to develop that part of like what I'm doing, and it's incredible. Just even working on a bag, like you get so fatigued when you're throwing those combinations inside like that,
Yeah, yeah,
and to be able to think at the same time, it's like it's an art form.
yeah.
So yeah.
Right, right. So I'm not going to ask you any questions that don't go off of things I've seen you say on Facebook. So, so I'm not going to get you any legal trouble that you wouldn't get yourself in. So you were going to box a cop. What was,
Well, no. What happened with this, and because this is
we can
funny.
check that if that's done. I mean, like,
No, no, no. I mean, it's an older thing. I was always into boxing, but I didn't actually box myself until after that. That was like what, 4 years ago. At this point, I owned a gym in Atlanta. It was a weightlifting, mostly a weightlifting gym. We did have self defense classes there, and we had some political discussions there. Um, but we didn't allow cops or military, and this became a fucking national story
right.
for like a second. Um, but when it happened and it all broke, this was in Atlanta. Some Atlanta cop challenged me to a boxing match. And I at that point I'd never boxed, so I was like, I'm not gonna box you right now. Like, like, he was a competitive amateur boxer and a cop.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's like, that's ridiculous. Like, I played hockey through college. I was like, do you want to do a fucking shootout challenge back and forth on ice? You know, um, so then I really, after I'd only trained for like 6 months in any kind of martial arts, and at that point I'd done mostly Muay Thai, less Western boxing. I went ahead and I was like, fine, and I tried to, like, I remembered his name and I put it out there, and I've said ever since, so for like a year now, I've kind of been putting this out there, like, Tommy Lefebvre, Sergeant Tommy Lefebvre, Atlanta Police Department. If you want to fucking fight me now, I'll fucking fight you now.
Yeah, yeah.
Because now, he's got years of training on me, but like, I've trained. I've had it, I've had some like smokers and low level shit. I'll go bang around with a cop. I don't care. Maybe I'll get knocked out, but I'll get to punch a cop in the face and not get arrested for it. Where's the lose in that scenario? There's not
Yeah,
much.
yeah. You only live once.
I've been beaten up by cops before. Okay, fine, but I didn't get to hit him.
Oh man, that's good. That's good. All right, so here, dramatic sea change. You got COVID. You got hit by the COVID.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I did. I don't know where I got it. Um, it's weird because, like, on one hand, I think the timeline suggests that I probably got it kind of in early March in New York City. Um, but then on the other hand, I know so many people that got really sick for a little bit in January or February, myself included. And like some friends that I was with, and I was actually hanging out in Atlanta in February, and I got like really inexplicably sick, and I was coughing, and my throat was really fucking sore.
Yeah.
This girl I was hanging out with sort of had the same thing. A lot of people I knew around, and then so maybe I got it then and just had weirder symptoms recur a month later. Because what happened to me was that in the middle of March, I just got like really tired for 3 days. I had like kind of sore throats, but I was like stressed out and smoking some cigarettes then, and I'm smoking weed every day in the evening. So like it was winter time up north. I got a sore throat. I didn't know. But then after that, I had this thing that looked like a sty, but it was more like crimson eyeshadow. And I had just read these articles about nurses in Washington State, like seeing that as a telltale sign. So I called my doctor here, and he was like, "Oh well, let's test you," and I was positive. By the time I knew I was positive, I felt fine. Um, the only thing remaining was a loss of taste and smell, which is with me to this day. I guess 3.5 weeks later, um, which makes like taking the garbage and the compost out really easy. Uh, uh, but I'm like trying to drink like a good bottle of wine that I had saved for an occasion, and like you can't. There's nothing. There's nothing. Or does this need salt? Is not something you can ask me. Uh, but no, I guess I recovered in other ways, and I mean I know this is a real illness. It was whatever I experienced was extremely mild, and I'm happy. I feel lucky for that because my lungs are. I was born with issues with my lungs. I've had pneumonia a bunch of times. I've been smoking since I was 11 years old. I've really mostly quit smoking cigarettes, but I've been smoking something since I was 11 years old. So my lungs are not good. Uh, so I was kind of like concerned about the whole thing when that happened. But on the other hand, my cardiovascular capacity is like very high because I've been an athlete forever. So it's like I never know if I'm healthy or not. I'm like half healthy. I'm half like really, really healthy, eat great food and train like a maniac, and then the other half of me is like taking drugs. So who knows?
Yeah. So before you got into, can you hear me properly?
Yeah, totally.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Before you got into kind of combat and boxing, you were really into weightlifting.
Yeah.
So what was that like? I don't think
Yeah, and weightlifting is in like
boxing.
capital W, like the sport of weightlifting,
Mhm.
which to most people call that Olympic weightlifting now,
Yeah.
um, versus like bodybuilding or just like lifting weights or even powerlifting. A lot of people think we mean powerlifting. So that's you're competing in the snatch and the clean and jerk, which are the lifts you'll see in the Olympics, and then all the training you do are kind of variations of reps of things that are based around those movements. So you're squatting all the time. And it's a lot about like legs and speed and coordination and technique. It has nothing to do with like what you look like
Yeah.
in the mirror. And it's just a very specific thing. It's not unlike a martial art, the way you're like training for it, the way meets are. And I
Yeah.
got into it, when I was like a dumb kid, trying to like work out for the first time after I couldn't really play sports anymore. But I lived in Russia for a while, and my kid's mother is Russian. Um, and when I was over there, I was at like some Globo gym, like being a 20-year-old that was lifting weights. Uh, and I met like some older Russian dudes that were serious about this sport, and like showed me how to snatch, showed me how to clean, and then sort of took it from there. And for me, I think it was the first piece. I mean, it was a very healing pursuit for me because I came from a place where like in one way or another, I was uh, I'm certainly not an oppressed person. I was born into a lot of wealth and position, but on the flip side of that, I was very kind of like ostentatious and weird, so I was bullied a lot, and I was pretty heavily pathologized with like every mental illness and disorder under the sun, and had a lot of drug things going on when I was a teenager. So I spent collectively, from childhood until I was about 20, I've spent probably 3 to 4 years in like residential facilities, treatment centers, rehabs, whatever. Was put into like basically solitary rooms for 2 days, put in straitjackets, Thorazine and shit. I mean everything, and some arrests and little couple days in jail. Um, but I was always in trouble with everything, so I definitely had this relationship to the world, kind of like, and I had these critiques of like, or just feeling really alienated by the country and the culture I lived in general, um, in America. Uh, and so lifting, like, I don't know, getting really strong and having, but also having that discipline and that sort of challenge. It was really helpful and uplifting to me. And then I would say fighting was like that times a million. Um, because instead of being stiff and this all the time, it's like it's all about like looseness and flow, and it's fighting. It's like, okay, You know, like that little 9-year-old boy that was like being pulled up against the locker called a faggot. Uh, you know, it's like I know that I would destroy that young man now who was doing that to me, and there's something internally that like makes that little boy feel better
Yeah,
from that.
yeah,
Um,
no,
and
definitely.
takes away the aggression where because that that little boy walks around, I think, in a lot of especially like white dudes in America, like like I want to fucking start shit with everyone all the time,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know. But actually channeling that into like one of these more aggressive disciplines, I think like really sublimates a lot of that kind of behavior. you know. So,
So yeah, so you get into weightlifting, get into this, but what I'm really curious is how did you? I mean, I don't want to get too much to your background too much, but like you do say, you do come from a wealthy family,
mhm.
um, and yet you find yourself in your 20s opening up a gym that does not allow cops in the military, and it becomes a national story. So where do we go from being your background in wealth and privilege, and then all of a sudden now you're like in a position to open up gyms and not have the cops and
Right.
cause controversy like that? What does it look like?
Yeah, I mean that's kind of like the predicament of my existence, as it were. I don't mean that in a bad way. That's just like that's sort of the question that exists around me. Uh, I mean, there's a lot a lot to that answer, but like I think being in the position that I'm in, it sort of makes total sense to me. Why I would come to Armenia, and to be clear, I identify as a communist.
Mhm.
Um, uh, because I don't think anybody, even the people who are most immediately victim, uh, to the worst parts of capitalism, uh, have any kind of the intimate understanding of like what the people who are running the show are doing, other than the people who come from that class.
Yeah,
Um, and I think most people take this cognitive dissonance, and then just kind of tell themselves stories that make them accept that it's all really good. Um, and but then some people, and I know a few people like that, are like see so frankly what's happening, um, uh, that it can affect them politically. I guess otherwise, like I think a lot of people probably assume. 'Cause I don't know. My family has like this big business from Atlanta, so maybe they think I went to like some like Southern private school and was like driving BMWs around at prom or something. Like, I don't even know what a prom is. Like uh, so I went to a very elite school in Brooklyn, but it's like the weirdo school. And my mother lived, what in New York City was considered sort of a middle class existence, and that's who I grew up with. And I wasn't like, I got like $5 a week for allowance, and like had to walk to school a couple miles. Like but I knew that somebody had a bunch of money somewhere, and like got to go to like the front row of the World Series that day real quick with my dad who showed up in a limo. So it was like I didn't really get it, but I was generally around people that were like middle class, and then I got a drug habit and didn't like being around school, so I was around a lot of folks who were working class, um, and and then I had like a teacher. I was already a rebellious kid. I've been getting in trouble since I was like 6, fucking getting sent to shrinks and everything. I just like I just hated the way culture was. I hated the way respectability worked in America. You would see the army everywhere. I didn't understand this, like what was going on, and then I get to be about got 11 or 12. I guess I was in 8th grade, and I have a history teacher who like has us read Zen. Um, uh, and like I had come in, I was such a precocious little fucking spoiled chump. That I was like, no, I was like talking about like Oscar Wilde, um, but also was like adopting some sort of weird like traditionalist like royalist arch. I don't know what like I wanted to like restore the European dynasties of old times that I just learned about. It was like wearing a fucking waistcoat around, um, and she was like, she basically just like slapped the shit out of me verbally for like a couple months, and like knew who my family was when I didn't even, you know, and like laid it out for me, and like, you know, taught me some like basic Marxist theory, and I ended up like reading Lenin when I was 12 and 13. um and was simultaneously kind of like fascinated by Russia, and you know, so I got really into like the idea of Marxism at a really young age. And then my one of my best friends who I grew up with, to me, is, you know, one of the preeminent kind of Marxist theorists or academics from this country. Certainly when it comes to a couple topics, certainly when it comes to food security, and certainly when it comes to the Middle East, and that's Max Isle. Uh, but um, uh, he was somebody that I was around a lot, and definitely, you know, he's a Jewish guy from a very Orthodox Jewish neighborhood in Brooklyn, you know, who was first and foremost sort of doing anti-Zionist work. So that was like the thing that I connected to earliest in terms of like whatever, like radical work and activism, and then the Iraq War. Um, you know, when that was all building up. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
I was like campaigning for Nader. um, and like out there, you know, at the protests at the UN and shit, and like very early on, I could just tell that like some people were out here, like putting signs up and doing something that had to do with like getting Democrats elected, and some people were like out here to fight, you know,
Yeah.
and I was just really drawn to that because in the end, I think, you know, materially, I've received, you know, every privilege you can possibly receive from capitalism, you know, and to this day, and part of that is because no matter what my politics are, family trusts are set up the way they are so that they can be impenetrable, so
Yeah.
that, you know, and so I'm, you know, and I love my family members, and they, you know, and a lot of them love me, and, you know, whatever. Some people feel how they feel. You know, I think like
Oh,
I don't even blame Jeff Bezos, you know, for capitalism. I think he's probably a piece of shit. You know, and a lot of people in those positions are, but like he's not the problem. The problem is the thing that created him. You know, just like Trump is like, Trump is not the reason everything's fucked up. Trump is like a really ugly, obvious blister of an example of how fucked up everything is. And like,
yeah.
here, take a look at it. You know.
Yeah.
Uh,
So just from listening to your life is kind of like a combination of the movies Reds and Arthur.
Jack Reed is like my hero. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But also Arthur with Dudley Moore, so you don't get too big headed about these things. Um, yeah. So we have a question from the audience. This
Yeah.
one comes from my lovely lady Karina. She asks, "Hi Fergie, for a young adult teenage male who has a lot of weight to lose, would you recommend lifting as heavy as possible, or less reps until exhaustion, or lifting moderate with many more reps until exhaustion, or a combo of both? Thanks."
um, I would recommend doing one of two things or both. I would recommend focusing on like the basically the power lifts or the primary compound lifts, which is squatting, deadlifting, strict overhead pressing, and bench pressing. Um, I would work 3 to 5 reps in really with controlled form and slowly get better. Or I would work with body weight movements, like push-ups and pull-ups and squats and lunges and jumping. You know, all that. You can look up endless body weight calisthenic stuff, core work. You know, as a boxer, that's all I do, supplementary, and I think it puts you in. Mike Tyson never lifted weights. He did shrugs sometimes. Otherwise, everything he did was calisthenic and on a bag. So, but a combination of those where you're doing like calisthenic work for really high reps, with like, yeah, working 3 to 5 maxes out on the compound lifts. Those are the best ways to kind of, you know, get strong and get in better shape and get the kind of, you know, hormones popping in your body that you want to be popping.
Hey, so okay, so I have a question actually about this. Does weightlifting have weight classes like like the
Mm-hmm.
150?
It does. Yep. 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 Yeah. So that transference, although the mindset's kind of different. Like a lot of times you're even bulking up for a meet, or if you're cutting like 3 or 4 kilos, maybe. Boxing is like, and especially like MMA, you're like, when you're getting ready for a fight, you're cutting at least 10 pounds, probably, if not more. So, yeah.
Who was gonna win? Was Ferguson or Khabib that happened?
Khabib, man, that was just like, I mean, nobody's ready to beat this guy yet.
Yeah, his wrestling.
I do want to see him fight Conor again. I want to see him fight Conor again.
He's gonna ragdoll him again. How's that? I don't see that changing in any way, shape, or form.
No, I'm sure. Well, it's just because I still feel like Conor's the one guy on earth who could just catch him with a weird shot. He'd just catch him with one.
Well, what makes you think Tony can't catch him with it? He throws the weirdest. He throws even weirder punches.
And I just feel like that definitely coming down to grappling, and when we get into grappling, we know who's going to win. That's just what I think about that. I don't know.
Do you think Conor? What about Conor Tony? What do you think about that fight?
What about what?
What about McGregor Ferguson? What happened there?
Probably Tony. But again, that's my feeling about Conor is like, we don't really know, but I think he is such a good striker. He's such a good striker. And that's why I say, like, he could step into any fight and he could win any fight. Just because he might throw those shots he was throwing in those fucking 40 seconds against Cowboy. He threw some like really expert and brutal shots just out the gate. I mean, he just like, let me remind the world what I could do really quick. Granted, like Cowboy is there to get beat on by everybody all the time. He showed some nice striking, and he always has. I mean, he could always beat anyone, but I think there are a few fighters that are better than him at this point. I don't know. We gotta see more of him. Who fucking knows? Maybe all this proper 12 has made him a better fighter.
What about man Jorge Masvidal, man? What do you think about this dude?
I kind of warmed up on him. I didn't used to like him that much, but I don't know.
On my knees.
Well, I went to this stupid BMF promotion fight, and like I like Nate, man.
Yeah, you're in for Nate.
I love Nate. Nate's like more dedicated to sparking the blunt in every photo op he gets than anyone I know. So I'm just like, I feel Nate.
Yeah. No, that press conference, that post-fight press conference was the best. And because was it I don't need no baby pity. And they start asking about his kid. He's like, I don't need any baby pity.
Yeah.
That was
anyway, what I was going to say though, before was just, I don't. While I've materially benefited, in every way, I don't worry about things on that level. I did feel like I was pretty traumatized in a few occasions in life, pretty directly by the same system, that I'm benefiting from. And I've watched it do it to other people. I've had, a number of people close to me go down by cop, go down, by mental illness, or like addiction as defined by capitalist medicine. I don't know. I've just seen and experienced enough of that like, I don't feel like some noble fucking freedom fighter that's like out there to help the poor man because of the benevolence of my own heart. I'm like, no, this shit's fucked up and it's hard to live in, if you're not going to live up in fucking La La Land.
Yeah.
Like flying around with your friends and like pretending that like getting truck beaten is the only thing that matters in the history of the world. Yeah. So that like you can have nicer people at your fucking dinner parties.
Yeah. So your story makes a lot of sense to me, though. Actually, when you talk about in terms of like getting a political development, because you talked about your mother being kind of middle class and being raised by kind of middle class mom or living middle class lifestyle as a child, right?
As a child, she was very much working class. She was from Boston, and her parents were both ended up really successful in their fields, not like super rich, but like her mom fucking basically invented
Yeah.
software engineering and programmed the Apollo spaceships.
Oh wow.
Um, but at the time they were like putting themselves through school and working multiple
Mhm.
jobs, you know, in Boston in the 50s, you
Yeah.
know. So
But I'm gonna say
she
about
came from a really humble, and they both came from like the middle of the woods in the Midwest,
yeah.
her parents. So she was definitely not connected to like any kind of elite shit.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That actually, the fact that you had one parent that was like the rest of us, and then you had one that was like part of the super elite. That actually lends itself much more to developing like kind of a market consciousness
Yeah.
than does actually having been just working
Well,
class. You know,
and my dad too, though, because my dad, and like I know my dad doesn't want me talking about him, but like, but he did. I mean, he's a pretty radical dude in his own right. Certainly, at one, in the '90s, he was like doing this movie out with these kids in Watts after the riots, and then he did shit on like prisons in Mississippi. It instructed me a lot, and and definitely like strayed from what was respectable within the family. So.
well, we're back to try and make my point here. I'll use my own story, right? Um, both my parents are very apolitical.
Mhm.
But just the economic stations I've lived in as a result of them um, made it very easy for me to become Marxist because
Right.
my life starts off in Atlanta, and because I get divorced, and I'm going between Northeast LA and Southeast LA, right? And
Hmm.
that's how my life starts. Then they get divorced when I'm like 2, so then they have joint custody. That's why I'm in 2 places. And my father and all the City O men constantly small business, constantly starting a business is failing, succeeding a little bit, then failing,
Yeah.
succeeding. That's my family, just like on that side, a lot of merchants. And finally, my dad, he left California, went to Texas. Then I'm full custody of my mom. She remarries. I end up in a suburb. I'm now like kind of middle class. This is a huge shock for me. Then my father in Dallas actually finally has a business that's nothing like compared to your family, but relatively successful. So now my dad's like a millionaire, and like he's inviting me out. I go live with him in Dallas for a little bit. Now we're like at the Mavericks game, sitting like I'm sitting 20 feet away from Mark Cuban. My life is completely different, right? And so like this kind of thing have gone from being we'll say rich, right? Well, my dad, he got rich in terms of just the general population, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I went from being poor, working poor as a kid, to this middle class thing as like a teenager. In my early 20s, I'm rich, but then me and my father, we have kind of a tumultuous relationship. So I'm working for him, that falls out. Next thing I know, I'm homeless, right?
Right.
So I have the, but that lends itself so well for me
Hmm.
to understand that the economic system is very arbitrary. I'm like, I was the same person the entire time, just equally intelligent, equally self-destructive, equally. I had I had all the exact same qualities through this entire journey. But had I just been poor, that'd have been harder to see. Had I just been middle class, that'd have been harder to see. Had I
Yeah.
just relatively rich, that'd have been harder to see. So all these things made sense to me because I got jerked around the economy a lot. So I think maybe when you tell me your story about your mom having just a normal life, and then there's a dad showing up in a limo, and then like you love your mom, you love your dad, you love them both. They're both people that you learn from them. You learn things that you don't like about them, that you don't want to be, things that you want to be different than them, things that you want to be similar. You see that they're both people, and then but you also see that one of them can fly around the world, and the other one has to show up and work in the morning. So the arbitrary nature of the economy,
Right.
it's much more apparent when you have access to more than one station.
For sure. For sure. Right. And actually have like human contact that's not like predicated on like an NGO relationship, or like I think a lot of people probably the only time they really interact with certain groups of folks are like when they volunteered for this organization, you know, and in their mind, like that counted, or like the person who worked for them, you know, uh, and like that doesn't, and like that's, it's great that you really love your housekeeper that you've had for 20 years. It's great that like you guys have forged an emotional relationship. Maybe that's great. I don't, but like that doesn't mean that you've actually interacted with people in an authentic way. Um, So I think that's the thing. And once you do that, especially, internationally too, uh, I mean, again, like Marxism is not like some like fanatic belief in some arbitrary set of dogma, right? Which is like how the press or the intelligentsia in the United States would frame it. Um, it's just materialism. It's just like, look, here's what happens with this. Here's where this money goes. Here's who fights about it. Here's who, here, and then here's class warfare reduced down, to this final stage where there's just these people who own shit and just these people who don't own shit. And then here's what happens next. Like that's all it is. You're sitting back there and looking at that.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
if you have access to all the information, uh, to me, then like you're going to come to the conclusion of communism, or you're a psychopath.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Conversation, you said that you had a better eye view into it than most people are afforded. And I remember when I posted something on Facebook. You and I are Facebook friends for a few years, I guess, but you don't really always know your Facebook friends. And so, like, we probably came into contact over the thing in Atlanta with the cops. That's probably how just movement people. And I posted something about like the capitalists. You really don't know how these people are, blah blah blah. And then you said you're absolutely right, da 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 da. And I'm like, no, you don't know what I'm talking about. Like I'm talking about the truly rich. Da, 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 that's not you. And then you privately messaged me, and I'm like, oh, okay, because I said so you have an eye view into it that that really you're the only one I know who actually has an eye view into it. But like for those who don't, for those who follow me, who watch me and follow my poetry, there's a poem called "I Have Called the Witch" that people tend to enjoy, and I actually got the lines in the conversation with you about the lifestyles of the rich. The six-figure charters were made it into the poem.
Yeah, yeah, those things exist. They do exist. I think. I mean, it's funny though about and all I would say about my own family is that, in some ways, I mean, my grandmother was really, really important to me. And she passed away recently. Um, she was part of that family. That really the head of that family uh, for decades and decades, and somebody that did a lot of shit. Um, she, while she absolutely prospered, lived very comfortably, had a lot of nice luxurious things. The portion of her sort of would be wealth uh, that she actually ever had any access to, that she wasn't either giving away or like just sort of leaving in the company, uh, was pretty small. And I think and a lot of things got done with that. I watched. I mean, we can't rely on that sort of system of philanthropy because I mean, it's nonsense. It's arbitrary. It feeds back to a system that wants to generate more profit anyway. But just as an individual, when I would sort of watch how much she would give away to something and just make a thing happen, um, it kind of like backdoor proved socialism right to me that, yeah, if you just take most of rich people's money, uh, and then make collectivize the ownership of what's actually public, then everything works really well and it's efficient. you know,
Getting into the efficiency of a planned economy versus what we have.
right?
This is a question I've kind of posed to everybody who's got some background in Marxism. Whatever their tendency is, just having a general background in Marxism. Same question I pose to everyone else. Why is it that a market system, or why is it that we see that today during this pandemic, this capitalist country has major shortages in these life-saving technologies? Why is that?
Uh, why do we have major short? Because we have a market economy. And I've no, I mean I've been talking even you know even to the rich, like I sort of draw the analogy of China, like
Mhm.
look at how efficiently they've handled this. Look at how sort of streamlined that economy is, and like there's still obviously a lot of class distinction there, and there's a billionaire class and a millionaire class, but the economy to a large extent is planned.
Mhm.
Um, and so it's able to stomach this because you don't. I mean, again, like profit motive is so fucking arbitrary. Uh, it's subject to all these different swings in demand, and then these swings in like overvaluing shit in trends, and you know and really just attaching value to shit that's not real with all the gambling that goes on in the market. um uh and like insider trading is like, I mean, it's like a strike zone in baseball. It's like there's like everything is insider trading. It's all a bunch of rich people like going off of each other's tips to each other about how they should fucking play games with everybody else's money. uh so
Yeah.
it's kind of like what's legal and what's not legal. Like, well, it's all doing the same thing.
That's
So
like
so
insider trading.
because of that, it's not, the market is not going to set us up in such a way, that equips us to deal with like large scale crises in a way that's beneficial to most people. You know, I got a test really quickly because I have a good doctor that I have to pay for, because otherwise you can't see a doctor for, a long ass time, where you just go to urgent care or the ER. And that's what, um, uh, so it's but that for a while he was the only fucking doctor that had tests around this county. um and then, I mean, that's the thing, that if we had a planned economy, it, very simply, like, Trump said that GM was going to make ventilators. Well, first off, like, it seems like ventilators don't actually really help this that much, and in some cases have been really harmful. uh, uh, but second off, it never actually happened. He didn't follow through with that. He just sort of said, "Oh, we'll do that." Well, if we actually had a planned economy, then all of these companies, Johnson and Johnson, Bristol Myers Squibb, all these motherfuckers would be, and it would be, first off, identifying if a ventilator was a useful thing, and then building a shit ton of them if they were, you know, just overnight. And then, the economic slowdown. Well, first off, there's plenty of like work going on, and the industry is sort of reallocated to something that's relevant in that moment. um uh and it benefits the public good instead of this like arbitrary metric of profit that like benefits the people that are profiting from it, all over the place in little dots. um and so when it gets tested, yeah, it just falls apart.
Yeah.
um and I think people I just hope people are recognizing like sort of how fake the money thing is, uh, as we roll through this, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it was a trip to listen to. I mean, one of the members of the squad talk about just like we're gonna print a $1 trillion coin or something like that, and what a ridiculous world we live in, where like we can solve our problems by printing coins. We're gonna coin, and it's like we're like living in like Lord of the Rings. Like there's gonna be this coin. We're gonna forge this coin,
That
right?
sounds like how Mormonism started.
I don't know, but I don't know if it was religious, but how we can forge a coin or something like that, and then like they're like throw it in the fire, and it's like no, like in Lord of the Rings, like this idea that you can forge, like I don't know, like that's just a bizarre kind of thing to me.
Right? Where are they making the value of the money?
No, it's gone. I mean, like it's gone. And especially when we look at like reflections of reflections of reflections of money and derivatives and debt. It's we're talking about you know just we're talking about a situation where I think that we're reading the derivative market was like 14 times the size of the gross world product,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
like that, and it's like
Mm-hmm.
you know 14 times the size of the gross world product. So we're talking about the fact that these are bets on bets on bets on bets on bets on bets on bets about that eventually tie back to a commodity.
Right.
Which I talked
Right.
with that.
Which is why in the end it's all predicated on the fucking military. Right? Because it's like, oh, we're in debt to everyone that we've got nukes on the border of. Like, I mean, it's like it's so blatant at this point.
And yeah, it's not a global. It's a global racket.
Right,
I
right.
mean, yeah, that's it. The war is a
Right.
racket. It's like
It's total racket. It's
it's,
total racket.
it's a racket.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is why, I mean, to me, like, what's sort of most compelling, that the reason that I'm like in the woods again, and like in the woods a lot of the time, it's because like small food holdings. Um, this is the only thing that I feel like I can get involved in that makes any sense in this moment. Um, uh, trying to like first off like create an enterprise that's not built on profit motive, and working with other people and sort of organizing, uh, not just community, because I think people throw community out there all over the place. It's sort of it's a buzzword in every sector and in every wing of politics. Um, uh, but like workers' councils. I mean that's what a Soviet is. Uh, a union, uh, and have people start thinking that way, and also just growing fucking food, uh, because if it does come down to I don't know, I don't want to be like apocalyptic about it, but I don't know where this COVID crisis ends up, right? Like it could really start to unravel like the fabric of how everything works. Things could just stop operating. There could be general strike, or there could be, you know, I mean, what are we up to? Like almost 25 million people unemployed on the books,
Yeah.
um, and then like that this is not accounting for freelancers. This is not accounting for, uh, I mean, a whole lot of people, uh, like Uber, Lyft drivers and shit. Uh, so there's, I mean, meanwhile, there are people who are like clearly flourishing all over the place. Like,
Oh,
I'm fine. I mean, we're planting vegetables and, you know, out there doing work outside because it's a rural environment. So you don't have to like be around people to go to work. And, we're doing our thing, but that's because I have fucking resources, you know?
yeah.
So, um,
So, yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. So, is there anything that the audience should know about anything at the plug? Anything coming up? Anything going on that you want to be aware of that you're up
the,
to? Any advice about this COVID thing since you did contract it? Should be
well,
okay.
I think, yeah, the important thing, I mean, they've definitely said that like generally being active as long as you're feeling well is really good thing to do, which is always the case, but hot liquids like hot baths, submerging oneself in hot liquids and drinking hot liquids over and over is like whatever everybody who I know who I think is sort of medically smart that I have access to, that's
Yeah,
been like the one refrain that keeps coming that everybody seems to know about this. It's like
yeah,
keep on drinking hot liquids, um, and have like good access to like vitamin C and D3, um, and I think that's probably what I was fine. Is I just like took good vitamins and ate good food, and
right.
that's why like again like the way through like this whole conundrum of like late capitalism and COVID, and all of the above, like to me it is about food security, because it's the only way that we're going to begin to be able to generate any kind of political autonomy, um, is if we don't have to rely on capitalism to feed ourselves and function. We'll get caught in these lockdowns like this indefinitely for other reasons. Um, uh, and I think I have a lot of opinions about like how this is being handled, and how it's not being handled. But in the end, it's very much. I posted this before. It's like my feelings about gun control. Like I think there are some these measures that we need to be taking, but we're not taking the right ones, and it's the wrong authority to make taking the measures.
Yeah,
Uh, uh, who I don't wish to empower more at all ever for any reason, um,
right.
because they are the enemy, um, of humanity at large, of me personally, of the political, of all of the above.
Of the
Um,
living planet.
what's that?
Of the living planet.
Hmm.
Of life on Earth.
Right, right, exactly,
Yeah.
right.
Um,
um,
you mentioned political autonomy. I kind of want to close on this one. Political autonomy. I really think that in many ways we have to start really building outside of the duopoly. We need to stop throwing our energy towards it.
Yeah.
Right now, Sanders again inspire everybody to bomb countries but get dental care while you're doing it.
Right.
Um, I mean, even the appeal is kind of disgusting me, but that kind of moves people in a certain way. He's obviously going to age out of this he's a 4-year cycle. So next up is probably AOC or another member of the squad. She's still too young to run for president. So it's going to be either Omar maybe or another one. So what can be done between now and then to really start building political autonomy?
I mean, I've really taken the road of, and I think it's not to be confused with sort of like an anarchist like absenteeism or like stepping out into the woods and being dead to the world, but I think like making a collective decision, especially with the opportunity that like this COVID moment presents, to just kind of say like, no, we're going to operate according to our own terms now, and just not really think about that. And like, this is why I don't vote, and I don't encourage people to vote in those elections, because I don't even wish to lend legitimacy, to this whole sort of forced system of consent that they've generated. Um, uh, I think that if we were able to politically organize enough people outside of any influence from especially the Democratic Party, because anyone that's working on the left is not really getting approached and co-opted by folks on the right. I mean, they might be getting fucking killed by them, but not they're not getting pulled into the Republican Party. They're getting pulled in the Democratic Party.
All right.
Um, uh, once you have mass organizations of like actual leftist movements, then maybe the discussion could be had about whether an electoral strategy made sense. Once you had that base and could start to generate an electoral movement with it. I still question whether that's even viable in the 21st century in the United States. In kind of the seat of the empire, whether there's like already kind of enough like crypto fascism going on that like that you can't win an election against them. That's very possible in my, I don't know. So, like, figuring out how to build things, make goods, produce food, and share information and knowledge with other people who are not dealing with that capitalist system as much as they can. That's the autonomy I'm talking about. Um, uh, that I think we don't really have another choice, because otherwise it is kind of like we can go this kind of Trump way. Uh, we can go down this line of like authoritarian nationalism. Um, if we try to hang around in the middle, then to me that means the fascists take over, whether they are the really blatant fascists like the Trumps and the Bolsonaros and the Hitlers and the these and that, or whether they're the sort of smiling fascists who say the right things and don't tweet nasty mean things at people and come from the right background, whatever. um, you know uh, that's what I think.
No, on that wonderful note of hope and change. Uh, really appreciate you joining us this hour, and I'm sure we'll be talking more and get better or keep feeling better. I guess. I mean, you seem fine.
Yeah, no, I'm fine. It was a few weeks ago when I was in bed, so yeah, it would be very easy for everyone to have had access to the kind of care I was able to give myself, but most people don't have it.
Yeah.
And that's the problem here. To me, it's not a really strong disease. It's a disease that we've now beaten the poor down so much that no one's even equipped to deal with a sort of mild disease uh, in this country. It's so fucked here.
Yeah.
And in other places with like highly privatized healthcare industries, market economy doesn't work.
That's the bottom line.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us, Fergie, and we'll post links to anything we're talking about in the bottom, and talk about everything, and sure we'll be talking in the future.
All right, man. Good to talk to you.